Jumatatu mpaka Ijumaa, moja kwa moja kutoka VOA Swahili.
Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory in for Esther Gyedu-Blay. It's Friday, November 4th, and this is Africa 54.
Kenya's drought has killed livestock, raised hunger, and also caused herder community kids to drop out of school. We'll have an on-scene report. While the applause continues for this week's Pretoria peace agreement between Addis and Mekele ending 2 years of war, it's time now to get aid into that shattered North Ethiopian region. In today's entertainment segment, VOA's Heather Maxwell jams with Ghana jazz great Gyedu-Blay Ambolley.
We begin in East Africa, where Kenyan authorities say a record drought that wiped out millions of livestock and has millions of people in need of food aid is forcing tens of thousands of children in harder communities to drop out of school. Kenya declared a national disaster from the drought of September last year, but it could also be looking at an education disaster. Ahmed Hussein reports from Wajir County, Kenya.
Kenya's National Drought Management Authority says nearly 4.5 million Kenyans need aid as a fifth failed rainy season in a row marks the worst drought in the Horn of Africa in nearly half a century. In the village of Kule in northeast Kenya's Wajir County, 11-year-old Nadir Mohammed and 2 of his 7 siblings were pulled out of school in August to take care of the family's livestock. Their mother Hindia Abdi says they were forced to move to greener pastures or else the animals will have died and they will have starved.
I would have liked the children to remain in school, but we needed their help to survive.
In the village of Karu, 17-year-old Sadiq Dakane arrives at one of the few working boreholes in the area. He trekked for 2 hours under the scorching sun to fetch the much-needed water.
I left school when the drought struck. My father moved with his cattle to Somalia, leaving my mother and me behind.
The UN Children's Fund in an October report says more than 400,000 Kenyan students are affected by the drought and estimates 66,000 have already dropped out of school nationwide. But the situation for children's education could be much worse. Sources tell VOA official estimates not yet released show in just 3 counties in northeastern Kenya, 100,000 children have dropped out of school. Local activists say this will have a negative impact in the future.
If this trend continues, the rate at which people are dropping out of schools, then we risk witnessing the largest dropout rate of people from schools. The entire lives of an entire generation is at risk. And you know what that will mean? Producing a generation that does not have quality education. And then there will be a burden. You know, drug abuse, insecurity, terror networks, radicalization, and the whole nation is at risk.
To lessen the impact of the drought, government and aid groups have been sinking more boreholes and bringing emergency food to herders and their livestock. But local authorities say the need is too great and the efforts over the years to increase school attendance among nomadic herder communities are taking a big hit.
The gains that have been made in the past are being reversed by the current severe La Nina-induced drought.
Officials and activists worry if rain does not come soon, more herder families will take their children out of school and it could take months or even years to get them back in the classroom. Ahmed Hussein for VOA News, Wajir, Kenya.
Pilots at the troubled national flag carrier Kenya Airways are planning to go on strike beginning Saturday. They're seeking better working conditions despite a court order suspending the industrial action, according to their union. Kenya Airways Pilots Association Secretary General Captain Murithi Nyaga says the action of the Kenya Airways management left the pilots with no other option but to walk out. Nyaga says the union had hoped that the airline would soften its stance and engage in negotiations on the issues raised. The pilots, who had a particularly fraught relationship with management, pressing for the reinstatement of contributions to a retirement fund. They also want back payment of all salaries stopped during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the African Union mediated peace agreement between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front brings cautious hope to millions affected by the civil war that left thousands dead and even more in need of aid. VOA's Pondiho has more.
Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed addressed Tigrayans on Thursday, one day after a negotiated breakthrough 2 years into the war that has killed thousands, displaced millions, and left hundreds of thousands of people facing famine. The Ethiopian government and regional forces from Tigray agreed on Wednesday to cease hostilities. But speaking to crowds outside of Addis Ababa, Abiy acknowledged the cost of destruction.
Very often, tricks and mischievous maneuvers are common after a peace deal. Therefore, I implore you, the respected people of Tigray, our Tigrayan brothers and sisters, with the utmost sincerity, to play your role and duty of Ethiopian citizenship with your other brothers and sisters, since we are ready to honor our commitments.
The Tigray People's Liberation Front has accused Abiy of centralizing power at the expense of the region and oppressing Tigrayans, which he denies. In contrast, Abiy has accused the TPLF of seeking to return to power at the national level, which he rejects. The scars of the violent 2-year conflict are still fresh and deep, despite the surprise ceasefire agreement reached in South Africa. Adom Ghebreyesus, a 39-year-old Tigrayan refugee, spoke in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, on his skepticism that the peace would last.
I left Tigray with my kids. The rest, they are there. I don't know what happened to them. It has been 2 years. I haven't heard anything from them. They live around the border with Eritrea, and that's the most unreachable place. No communications, no power, no banking system. I don't know even if they are alive.
According to a joint investigation by the United Nations and Ethiopia's state-appointed Human Rights Commission, all sides fighting in the Tigray war committed violations that may amount to war crimes.
News of the truce is extremely welcome, and conceivably it should impact positively, because it was in the context of the war that so many of these abuses we observed, and really abuses of many covenant rights.
Mustafa Yusuf Ali, the conflict resolution expert at the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies, a Nairobi-based non-profit think tank, says there needs to be a period of healing.
This agreement, and many analysts are saying that it needs to be coordinated, it needs to be systematic, and above all, it needs to be sequenced so that the Tigrayans are not left to their devices after handing in all the weapons. Then suddenly they are attacked by the center. This has happened in many other countries, and this is something to watch.
Tigray's lead negotiator says the agreement, which includes disarmament and federal control of the region, contains painful concessions. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Well, for more reaction to the ceasefire between the Ethiopian government and the Tigrayan forces, a reporter Eskinder Firoy in Addis Ababa spoke to a cross-section of people.
My opinion on this portion is that negotiation is excellent for both sides. It will be good if the negotiation could be honest and respected by both sides. But I do not have any trust on Wayanes or TPLF, because when they seem that a time of conducive, they will betray you. Therefore, we see it as a good one, as a good step, but we have to know the 10 points or the 8 points is what they have agreed to. Still, we are not fully informed about it. Therefore, we shall see and wait for all.
My name is Yared Behelu. It is a good agreement, especially the cessation of hostilities. It has been almost 2 years since the war broke in northern Ethiopia, and it has cost us a lot. Hence, it is very good that they agreed to a cessation of hostilities. Because both sides did not win or lose the war, it is good news both locally and internationally. I was discussing the issue with my friends too. I will be happy if we all Ethiopians make more effort and move forward on the path of development.
My name is Gyedu-Blay from Bahar Dar, the capital city of Amhara region. What actually makes me so much excited is the ceasefire agreement they made was fantastic, because currently the civil war is still going on. But I guess right after the deal they make, it's going to be banned. I think the two parties need to work harder in terms of bringing about peace and development, and especially in particular with the deal they made.
Well, those were Ethiopian citizens commenting on the signing of a truce between the Ethiopian government and Tigrayan forces. Now, the United Nations 27th Annual Climate Conference begins on Sunday amid calls for action. As climate change-related disasters escalate worldwide, international efforts to slow the carnage, prepare for crisis and help poor nations recover from droughts, floods and fires have never been more urgent. VOA's Heather Murdoch reports from Istanbul.
Millions of families in Syria have survived 12 years of war, displacement, and abject poverty. But as farms dry out in the worst drought in living memory, some of these families are not sure they can survive climate change.
Climate change has affected us very dramatically before and after our displacement. The cold has become very cold. Heat has become very hot. Our children are often sick.
In East Africa, children are dying from hunger as they also suffer through the worst drought in 40 years. Besides water shortages in Africa, the Middle East, Europe, America, and Asia, experts say extreme weather-related disasters are increasing around the globe at an unprecedented pace. Floods alone this year have killed more than 2,300 people, mostly in Pakistan and Nigeria. Fires have devastated lives and livelihoods on almost every continent. The world is also suffering from heat waves, deadly storms, and rising sea levels. Officials of the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, known as COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, say the event will focus on getting countries to implement policies and promises that they have already made, but have so far failed to carry out. Policies that aim to slow the warming global temperatures at the heart of these disasters.
What we see in the world is a huge implementation gap in terms of climate action. So there is a deficiency in terms of the action on mitigation. There is a deficiency in terms of the action on adaptation.
Additionally, officials expect renewed efforts to get wealthy polluting countries to pay for the devastation in the poorest, most impacted countries. But on the farms and in the villages of northwestern Syria, residents say they have little hope that the powerful nations will act in time.
Drought means hunger. I wish something would prevent this drought from getting worse.
Local farmers in Syria say every year their resources dwindle as their land dries, and without immediate action, they may soon join the millions of people already displaced by climate change. Heather Murdoch, VOA News, Istanbul.
Well, COP27 is a unique opportunity for African countries to make their voices heard on the continent's challenges in tackling the climate crisis. A report released this year by the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, The Road to COP27, Making Africa's Case in the Climate Debate, discusses the difficult task of ensuring that everyone in Africa has access to energy while also protecting the environment. Viewers Linomudu discussed the issues with Mary Robinson, chair of the Elders and former president of Ireland.
We know that climate change has been much more severe in the poorest countries, poorest communities, small island states and indigenous peoples. And they also happen to be the black and brown people of the world. So it's a racial injustice. Secondly, there's a gender dimension very clearly in that. Different social roles of women, different power, or rather lack of power, different access to credit, etc. And yet they have to be put food on the table, make their communities resilient. And the third injustice is the one that young people are very vocal on now and calling us out on, which I'm glad about, because they see they're not going to have a safe future unless we deal with the problems now. And the injustice against nature. What I'm also hearing, and heard it very clearly at the Mo Ibrahim Forum, is Africa doesn't want to be considered just a victim. Africa also is contributing hugely to mitigation of carbon through the forests, for example, in Africa. If we had a proper price on carbon, Africa would benefit enormously.
What are the main hurdles to overcome and challenges to address when it comes to unleashing the potential of Africa as a key resource for global energy transition?
We know the climate crisis has affected disproportionately. Then COVID came along and we didn't have fair and equitable access to vaccines. So that put a heavy burden on governments. And then we had rising costs exacerbated now by this war in Europe. The invasion by Russia of Ukraine is distorting food and fuel and fertilizer prices, and African countries are suffering disproportionately again because of a dependence on importing food. It's a lesson to Africa to produce far more food locally, partly for climate reasons, because the long supply chains across oceans, that also has a huge emissions. That's a big part of the carbon problem, the shipping or the air transport. That's part of these long globalized supply chains.
If you were to give us 2 or 3 key recommendations to leverage Africa's potential while ensuring the preservation of its environment, what would they be?
There is a commitment to double adaptation finance, but actually if we had the proper target, we'd know that's not nearly enough. We have to go far above that. 100 billion is only, implementing a way of de-risking to bring in the trillions that are needed, including significantly to help Africa to have energy justice, a fair, equitable access. And I found the same messages at the Sustainable Energy for All and the same involvement of young people, I'm glad to say. And it just makes a difference. I think it has the makings of a good COP if African leaders come bringing a lot of the messaging that we've heard at this Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and including a self-acknowledgement that there has to be a step up on governance.
A lot of people are frustrated when they see that there are all these meetings and they say there is no big concrete change afterwards. For example, what sort of impact has the person on the ground in Africa seen after a big meeting like COP26? And what needs to be evaluated this year at COP27?
I have to say there were at least some important issues dealt with at COP26. One was that we can't wait another 5 years or 3 years for the big emitters, the G20 countries, to increase their ambition, because we're not on track for a safe world. On one of the last days, Climate Action Tracker came out with a report that said if all the pledges made before and at COP26 were implemented, we would still be on course for a 2.4 degree world. And of course, they're not being implemented, and we're on course for a worse world now. We need a strong, unified African voice demanding of those who've been emitting most, both historic and the countries like China, India, Russia, that are current, and Saudi Arabia, that are big emitters now. It is really important that we seize the innovative ideas. The fact that a lot of the minerals for a green economy for the world are in Africa. They mustn't be extracted and exploited out of Africa elsewhere. They must be developed in Africa with clean energy. And that can all be done if there is proper financing. And that financing is slower, partly because of good governance reasons. So it's all tied in together. And I have great hopes for Africa because of its youth.
Well, that was viewers Lina Omodu speaking with Mary Robinson, chair of the Elders and former president of Ireland. Superb there. Now, we're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, a Ghanaian musician endeavors to bring jazz back to Africa. We'll be right back.
American women of African descent have a big stake in this year's U.S. midterm election on local, state, and federal level. Many believe that holding a public office will give them the best opportunity to help the U.S. African communities. Yet their paths to a seat on the table aren't without barriers. This week on Our Voices, we will shed a light on their career and life through the lens of U.S. midterm election. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Lina Omodu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
From around the world. Let's go.
Well, in other news, Guinea's Justice Minister is ordering legal proceedings against former President Alpha Conde and more than 180 officials from his deposed regime for alleged corruption and embezzlement of public funds. The World Bank says South Africa has been granted financing of $497 million to decommission one of its largest coal-fired power plants and convert it to renewable energy. And Malian Muslim leaders are calling for demonstrations against a video circulating on social media in which a man says things deemed blasphemous to Islam. Well, now it's time for entertainment reports. Let's look at how one musician from Ghana aims to bring jazz back to Africa. Viewers Heather Maxwell, host of the Music Time in Africa radio show, speaks with veteran Semigua musician, composer, and band leader Gyedu-Blay Ambolley from Accra to talk about his music and jazz mission.
Gyedu-Blay Ambolley, nice to see you.
Nice to see you after a long time.
You are rocking and rolling. You have a new album out. Tell me about that.
The new album is called Gyedu-Blay Ambolley and High Life Jazz. You know, living in America some time ago, I thought that something needs to be done to the jazz music. Though jazz was originated in America, but the roots is in Africa. I told myself that I think it's about time that I bring jazz back to Africa.
Are all of the band members Ghanaian?
All of them, because when I came back from America, I put this band together. And I saw some young and up-and-coming, musicians that have potentials. So these are the kind of musicians that I put them all together. And we've been together for almost about 10 years now.
Post-COVID, you have been out and about in the world. I see you were in
Amsterdam, France.
Rotterdam.
Rotterdam, Germany, talking about Sweden, I've been just combing around the European circles, and it's been wonderful.
Since COVID, is this your first international tour since 2019 or 2020?
This is the second time around. We were supposed to go, but when the COVID came, everything was shut down. And since, everything was shut, we had to wait until everything gets back to being lifted. Then that time, the album had been released. So we thought that we need to, go on tour to promote the new album. We went to a European tour, and that's what we did.
I noticed in the recording at Rotterdam, you sang a lot about mental slavery, and that reminds me of Fela Kuti's same words so many decades ago now. Is that really something on your mind still?
Yes, basically it is, because I think that Africa, we've been sleeping, and it's time for us to wake up, because I kept on asking what is happening. I saw that, the mental slavery, the intellectual castrations and everything, it's been going on for too long. And instead of Africa, for us to be together, it has become individualism. It means that we can't get together to be able to make Africa a better place for all of us and our children.
Are you still calling your music Simigwa?
Yes, Simigwadu.
Can you describe it?
Simigwa in my language means I'm sitting on my stool, just like a king who is sitting. From the initial time that I started music and started recording, that has been my, my basic mindset. My music brings people together one way or the other, and also, inform people of what needs to be done that hasn't been done.
Do you plan on coming to the United States soon, or doing another international tour soon?
Looking forward to that. I think I've had enough of Europe. I think the next step has to be in America, because whatever that we're doing, we hear you back in Africa. And when we hear you back in Africa, this is how we also contribute towards the format of jazz music that you've been able to come out with.
Gyedu-Blay Ambolley, thank you so much for joining me from Accra.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well, that's our entertainment for today. Join us every Friday for another exciting Heather Maxwell Entertainment Report. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend.